according to WebMD, 7% of the world population may have some form of undiagnosed dissociative disorder. That, in a more numerical term, is 490 million people who walk around undiagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. The amount of people in the world who are diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder is 1%, which in a more numerical term is 7 million people. You, as the audience, may be wondering how this topic may be relative to you, and personally, it may not be, but educationally, yes, it is. Like I said before, 490 million people go undiagnosed with this disorder, and this could mean that several people you know or don't know could be walking around, going about their day-to-day lives, not knowing that their disorder is consuming their lives. Due to the nature of mental health disorders, people who may have them often live with their symptoms for a long time before seeking treatment. Because of the reputation that mental illnesses have, people tend to hide their symptoms or just deal with them, which in turn often turns people away from dealing with them, and then they often self-medicate or abuse drugs or alcohol in order to get relief from their symptoms. Despite what movies or shows may suggest, it is up to the patient and healthcare providers to break the stereotype of the dangerous tendencies people with DIDs may have. Knowing there are around 500 million people dealing with DID and 490 million people are undiagnosed, this is meaning that there are 490 million people walking around with one or more separate personalities from their own, who don't understand or know how to control what they are going through. In order to shed some light on the mental illness that consumes more than 8% of the world population, I will first talk about the reputations of mental illnesses and why people who may have one do not seek help. Then I will go on to talk about how movies change the perception of certain mental illnesses, such as DIDs, and lastly, I will talk about what it is like to deal with one or more personality. Mental health disorders are more frequent than cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. Mental illnesses affect hundreds of millions of people worldwide and can be very life-threatening. From Unity Behavioral Health and their post on why mental illnesses often go undiagnosed and untreated, they state that by the year 2020, mental health disorders are projected to overtake the physical diseases as a more recurrent cause of disability. 50% of patients begin feeling their mental illness come on by the age of 14, and 75% of patients feel it by the age of 25. Despite how early their illness may show, between 76 and 85% of serious cases do not receive treatment in low and middle income nations. The range drops between 35 and 50% in a high income nation, yet the higher income countries still represent a large margin. Patients dealing with mental disorders often turn to alcohol or drugs to help them cope with what they are feeling before they ever decide to seek medical attention. There is always a threat for patients that self-medicate to become more and more dependent on the substance that they are abusing. The most commonly used drugs for self-medication are heroin, pills, and alcohol. Depending on how much the patient decides to do, they will always be a threat of creating additional mental illnesses. From Tom Hanks in the movie Cloud Atlas, Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor, and the most recent movie phenomenon, Split, played by James McAvoy, these men and movies all have something pretty big in common. They are all creating their own play on the disorder I have been discussing. The audience who watches these movies often feels as though they know exactly what the disorder looks like because they know how it is displayed in the movies or the shows. TV show, movie, and book Psycho, or Bates Motel, made a huge hit with Norman Bates, who deals with this disorder. He often finds himself forgetting key things that happened to him because his other personality, his mother, takes over and doesn't let Norman come through. From the Guardian's post on DIDs, they say, Psycho is a horror masterpiece, but as a portrayal of real life, mental health condition is nonsense. DID does not make you a psycho. Until Melanie Goodwin was 40 years old, she had no memory of her life before she was 16. When she had a family tragedy, something was triggered in her, and she became very aware of her other identities inside her. She states that her identities were a version of her, but at different ages. They ranged from 3 to 16 years old, and even into adulthood. Found on Mosaic's post on DID, Rumi Aquarone, a therapist for trauma and dissociation, states that in most cases, people dealing with DIDs have a history of child abuse, generally starting before the age of 5. DID usually starts with an attempt to cope with trauma, The theory is the child dissociates and splits oneself into different parts, and he will endure the abuse, and the other one will exist after the abuse. If it goes on for many years, the personalities will just keep splitting. Although the movies may say one thing, it is always important to be educated on the matter, have open arms to people who deal with DIDs, and assist them in seeking medical attention before their disorder gets out of hand. And know that these people are just people, same as you and I. They may have just dealt with the problems different. Mental illnesses often push people to abuse substances instead of seek medical attention. In order to assist them is seeking help. You have to push what you think and what you know about DID to the other side, because there are around 500 million people dealing with this disease who do not understand their own personalities, let alone multiple different personalities. Living with multiple personalities is not something you wake up understanding. For months, maybe years after accepting it, I was discovering new things, fresh areas I hadn't considered. A quote from Kim Noble's book, All of Me.